Bryce Young is back to being a fantasy relevant quarterback now that the Panthers have hired Dave Canales. All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast.
You are Locked On Dynasty Football, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Here are your hosts, Marcus Mosher and Kate Madjuk.
Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you for tuning in. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Kate Madjuk. You can follow her on Twitter at Kate Madjuk. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates that you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That is linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. On today's show, we are taking a look at some head coaching hirings across the NFL and how that may impact your dynasty leagues. And Kate, I want to start in Carolina because this one is maybe the most fascinating to me. The Panthers hired Dave Canales, who was the offensive coordinator for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers last year. He was also the quarterback coach with the Seattle Seahawks in 2022. I've got to say, I love this move. I think this is going to help Bryce Young, but I think you're a little bit more pessimistic here.
I am. Now, I'm not here to discount what he did with Baker Mayfield or Geno Smith. I mean, both of these quarterbacks were looked at and presumed as left for dead. Like, let's just say that. Nobody expected any sort of relevance or offensive production with these two quarterbacks under center. And guess what? Both Smith and Mayfield set career highs in completion percentage, passing yards, passing touchdowns under Dave Canales. And that's fantastic. You've got to be excited for that at face value when you're thinking about Bryce Young. But I'm here to point out and bring you back down to earth, Marcus, because Geno Smith was throwing to DK Metcalf and a much younger Tyler Lockett at the time. Baker Mayfield throwing to Mike Evans, Chris Godwin, two of the best wide receivers in the league, and Rachaad White, one of the most productive receiving running backs in the league this year. Look at the surrounding cast for Baker Mayfield. Wide receivers under contract this season: Adam Thielen, Jonathan Mingo, Laviska Shenault, Terrace Marshall, and DJ Chark. That is not even in the same stratosphere. And like, obviously there's a lot of time left, but they are going to grossly need to improve this Carolina Panthers offense. They have a lot of holes to fill. And Marcus, they traded away what could have been a staple piece in their rebuild to go get Bryce Young. So their first pick in this draft going to be number 33. They have pick 65. So they only have 2 picks in the top 100. I'm just here to say that this is not an ideal situation that he's coming into. I think we might need to be a lot more patient than we probably are expecting right out of the gate, given his history.
Yes, but I do think talent can change rather quickly. And I do think Carolina is going to be pretty aggressive in free agency. Maybe they try to go out and get a T. Higgins. Maybe they overpay for a Michael Pittman. And let's say that's a guy. Let's say they go out and get Michael Pittman, and all of a sudden it's Michael Pittman, it's Jonathan Mingo, and then you draft a guy at 33. Like, it's not great. I understand, but it's significantly better than what you had at this time last year, right? I just trust that Canales is going to put Bryce Young in the best position to succeed. He even talked about it in his opening press conference, Kate. Like, we're going to build our offense around what Bryce Young does well. We're not going to force him to try to play any other kind of style of quarterback. We saw, I just keep coming back to Baker Mayfield. Baker Mayfield went from a guy that was benched, working as a scout team defensive end for the Carolina Panthers in 2022, got cut, went to the Rams, had an okay season with the Rams, and then he goes to Tampa Bay and he's like 3rd in touchdown passes. He helps them win a playoff game. I'm not expecting that big of a jump for Bryce Young, but I do expect him to be relevant. And that is more than what we saw last year from him. So I'm looking at his dynasty price right now, Kate, and you can get him outside of the top 16 quarterbacks. I think I'm kind of in.
Again, all of that is very fair. And I mean, we look at Bryce Young, obviously last year was a disaster. Ranked 31st in the league in completion percentage, 31st in passing yards per game, dead last in the league in passing yards per attempt. Like, not good, not good. But again, you look at that cast of receivers. Obviously, it can take time to change. We're talking dynasty. So like I know you can't have such a pigeonholed view, but I do wonder personally if there's going to be probably a slower start than most are expecting just for the name value of the situation, and there's going to be this air of disappointment. Say Bryce Young comes out and things don't click right away. That might be a even better buy now window, because I do think that long term he is good for this offense. He's good for Bryce Young. I'm I'm just wondering, is now the time to buy? Because
Yes.
I think they're gonna have more hiccups before things get better.
I think now is the time to buy because he's so cheap. QB 20 right now for Bryce Young. Like, is it going to get cheaper? Probably not. Like, if he performs poorly to start the year, he's just going to fall off the face of the earth, and you're just not going to want him, right? But I actually think there's a chance that he comes out, plays really well. He gets that second year bump that we see a lot of these quarterbacks get. He has a functional play caller. He's going to have more weapons. Like, there's no doubt, Kate, that you agree that the Panthers are going to have better weapons this year than what they had last year, right? Like they almost have to.
By default, they
Yeah.
they have to. Like, if they do anything to this receiving core, it almost assuredly has to get better. So I understand. I'm just a little bit more tepid than you are now. I think the other question to ask yourself is, what do you think Bryce Young's ceiling in Dynasty is? How, obviously not. He is like he's capable of moving the pocket, but he also is more of a traditional passer. What do
Mhm.
you think that? How high is his actual ceiling for fantasy going to be?
Probably he will be in that mold of like again, if he hits the ceiling, like a highly efficient passer who you hope gets a lot of volume but doesn't really give you a lot with your legs. So the ceiling, the absolute ceiling is like the Joe Burrow, right? But he's not going to be Joe Burrow. So I think the more realistic ceiling is you're in that Tua, Brock Purdy, Jared Goff range of
So
quarterbacks.
we'll say low end QB1 on any given week, but probably going to be more of a QB2.
Yes, right. And I just think if you can get a high-end QB2 who is 22 years old and it doesn't cost you top 20 prices, I'm in. We should also mention the draft capital. Like, we've seen time and time again, like, if you are a former number one pick, you're just going to get chance after chance after chance. Look at Jared Goff, right? Jared Goff got benched with the Rams, went to the Lions and having success, right? Took the Lions to the NFC Championship game. Look at Baker Mayfield, who we just talked about, right? Another former number one pick that's been on multiple teams now, back to being fantasy relevant. I just think Bryce Young is going to get an indefinite amount of opportunities to show that he was worth what Carolina had to trade up to get him. For that reason, I'm in.
I also think actually that's a good point. It's not just the draft capital, right? Because the draft capital in and of itself is super valuable, it having been drafted as the number one overall pick. But it's not just a pick that the Panthers held and decided to use. They traded the farm to go up and get him. So I do think that also holds its weight pretty significantly.
I agree. All right, let's move on to a different situation. I want to talk about Brian Callahan and the Tennessee Titans, because talk about a change in offensive philosophy, going from whatever they were doing under Mike Vrabel to Brian Callahan. We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by LinkedIn. At the start of the new year, every small business owner is asking themselves the same question: what's the one move that I can make that'll take my business to the next level? LinkedIn Jobs knows that your success all depends on the team that you surround yourself with. That is why LinkedIn Jobs has created the tools to help you find the right professionals for your team faster and for free. LinkedIn isn't just another job board. LinkedIn has a vast network of more than 1 billion professionals, which makes it the best place to hire. Hiring is easy when you have this many quality candidates. So easy, in fact, that 86% of small businesses get a qualified candidate within 24 hours. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn also knows that small businesses are wearing so many hats and might not have the time or the resources to hire. Thankfully, with LinkedIn, that process is so quick and easy. To post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedon. That is linkedin.com/lockedon NFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Want to let you know that this episode is brought to you by DoorDash. Did the game go to timeout? Time to order in with DoorDash. Is it halftime? That is ordering in time. 2-minute warning. You got it. That is your cue to order in. You can order pizza, wings, sodas, burgers, or even just buns on DoorDash and get it all delivered without missing the game on Sunday. Get prepared before Sunday. Stock up on your favorite appetizers. Order all the tailgate gear you need on DoorDash and then get ready to watch your team win. Get 50% off up to a $10 value when you spend $15 or more on your first order when you download the DoorDash app and enter promo code LOCK23, subject to change, terms apply. Again, that is 50% off up to a $10 value when you order on DoorDash and you download the DoorDash app and spend $15 or more, subject to change, terms apply. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We want to let you know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. All right, Kate, let's talk about the Tennessee Titans. They hired Brian Callahan to be their new head coach and play caller. He was loved in Cincinnati. I think we're going to see a lot more shotgun. We're going to see a lot more passing. What are your thoughts on this new look offense in Tennessee?
I will say, I think we're going to see a much more productive offense. You mentioned the increase in pass attempts. Now, under head coach Mike Vrabel, they ranked 11th or lower in total rush attempts in the NFL, 11th or higher in the league in total rush attempts in 5 of his 6 seasons with the Titans. Ranked 25th or lower in total pass attempts in each of those marks. Like, this was absolutely a run heavy scheme that wasn't going to complement any sort of passing attack, right? Like, I've mentioned here on our show before, I really, really like Will Levis. And I think his ceiling as a fantasy quarterback in particular could be exceptional. And this hire has to be all that you could want and more. And I do think that the Tennessee Titans are actually probably a little bit more prepared to bolster their receiving core. Now, things don't look great, right? You look at their current situation under contract right now. They have DeAndre Hopkins, Treylon Burks, Kyle Phillips, Colton Dowell. That is their current receiving core.
Deep
So
dynasty
obviously, there's some work to be done, Marcus. There is a lot of work to be done. But
Quanko, though, I like him.
Chigakonko, yes, I think he's got a lot of untapped potential. There's not a ton there at the moment, but I will say I also think that they're a little bit more equipped with their current draft capital to make an impact on that right out of the gate. I mean, you look at this general offensive philosophy, it's been Derrick Henry and pretty much nothing else. I do think that this offense is going to start running through the quarterback. And if Will Levis is the guy, I think Will Levis is a low-end QB1 with upside, like a rocket of an arm, sneaky mobile for especially a guy of his size. He could be I'll say a Josh Allen light if he gets the receiving weapons.
So every year in my fantasy leagues, I try to pick 1 or 2 offenses that I think could be like significantly better than they were last year, and where the ADP hasn't caught up yet. I think like Green Bay was a good example this year. Like everybody from Green Bay was so suppressed in value. And basically, if you bought into Green Bay's offense at all this year, you were rewarded, right? I think there's a chance that Tennessee is that this year. I think they're going to get away from this plotting style of running with Derrick Henry, even though I love Derrick Henry. But I just think Tajay Spears fits so well, like in a wide open offense where you're playing out a shotgun and you can give him, 7 to 8 targets in the game. You let Will Levis run the ball a little bit more. You let him do what he's was really good at in Kentucky. I'm not sure it's going to be in year one, but I do think this offense is going to be really fun to watch pretty quickly. So again, I'm excited about this hiring. I think I'm going to keep saying Bill Callahan because that's his dad. Brian Callahan is one of the better offensive minds in the league. And this is just such a philosophical shift from Tennessee, from what they've been doing over the last basically 10 years. I can't wait to see it play out. I am so excited, Kate.
I definitely think there's going to be a little bit of a lag time here between, a time where this ADP will kind of catch up to what we're actually going to see play out here in Tennessee. Because you're right, like this isn't just a coaching shift. This is a complete and total change in philosophy. And the reason it's so stark is because Mike Vrabel, I think, was so heavily oriented in the complete and total opposite direction that I think Callahan is going to take this team. And if Will Levis is the guy, obviously he fell into the second round. He doesn't have that top end draft capital, but with the 7th overall pick, this is a very top heavy, talented, loaded wide receiver class. They could actually end up with one of the top end wide receivers in this draft class here.
Or the offensive line, which I think is very likely as well.
I think that's also fair. But all of a sudden, if you get some casting characters and you don't have, Kyle Phillips as your wide receiver 2 some games, wide receiver 3, depending on, Treylon Burks and what you're thinking of him. I still think Treylon Burks has a lot of potential. I would love to see them get him back into the slot, which is where he succeeded so much in college, got him drafted that highly to begin with. And then I think they tried to make him more of this X receiver. And I get it. You look at him, he's got the size. He looks like he might be more of an X receiver, but he's a slot receiver. Get him back into the slot.
He's a power slot.
Yes, that's a great phrase. He is a power slot. Get him back into the slot. Have DeAndre Hopkins and wide receiver XYZ lined up opposite him. And suddenly I think this offense is, at least top 15 in the league, if not higher.
Yeah, I agree. I do think they're going to try to add some more speed onto the offense because that's just what they were missing so much last year. But yeah, we've seen Callahan do a really good job of moving Jamar Chase around and getting him in big time matchups. We've also seen them against good defenses just go on this ridiculous pass happy streak where they're fine throwing the ball 45 times and having a low ADOT, which is actually okay for us because if you have Chigakonkwo or Tajay Spears, you just want as many targets as possible, especially after coming from an offense where it was so sporadic when you would get your targets. Again, this is another offense that I'm really excited to see this year. I think Callahan has a chance to be arguably the best year one head coach. I think he's got the chance to make the biggest difference in 2024. Okay, we're going to talk about the Washington head coach, which actually was just announced as we are starting the podcast. So let's talk about what Dan Quinn can bring to the Washington Commanders next. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Prize Picks is the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. It is the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS because it's just you against the numbers. Instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks, all you have to do is pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. Prize Picks is the most fun that I've had playing DFS because there's so many different players and so many different stat projections that you can choose from. Plus, Prize Picks even offers a reboot policy so that your entries stay in play, even if one of your players gets injured. For football and basketball games, if you have a player who exits the game in the first half and does not return in the second, that player is rebooted. PrizePicks is the only daily fantasy sports platform with an injury insurance policy. So go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Again, go to prizepicks.com/LockedOnNFL and use promo code LockedOnNFL for a first deposit match up to $100. Welcome back to the Locked On Dynasty Football Podcast. We are discussing some head coaching changes across the NFL and what it might mean for your dynasty leagues. And let's go to Dan Quinn with the Washington Commanders. Again, that was announced just as we are starting the show. What are your initial thoughts here, Kate?
My initial thoughts are interesting. Very, very interesting. I was kind of surprised to see that Dan Quinn would be still in the mix for a head coaching position after the abysmal collapse we saw with him as defensive coordinator here in the playoffs. But that aside, that total and utter shock aside, there's kind of an interesting dynamic, I think, in Washington now because, like, let's not forget, we actually have a pretty significant coaching record here with Dan Quinn as a head coach. He was the head coach of the Atlanta Falcons for 6 seasons. And Marcus, what I do think is really interesting for a defensive head coach, Dan Quinn had a lot of pass heavy offenses here when he was working with Matt Ryan. Like most of his offenses favored the pass in well, let me see. 4 of those seasons. This was a top 8 team in terms of total pass attempts. Every single Dan Quinn team led ranked top 10 in terms of passing yardage. The run kind of absent. So I actually think that, if you're a Terry McLaurin manager, if you are a Jahan Dotson manager, obviously they still have a lot of questions to figure out, quarterback being one of them. But generally speaking, I do think Dan Quinn is going to favor the pass based on the history that we've seen. And that could be good news because I think both McLaurin, Jahan Dotson, their values have dipped as of late. And I think a lot of that's in part to the inconsistencies that we saw here in this past season.
It's going to be huge to see who he gets as his offensive coordinator. There was a rumor kind of floating out there last week that Dan Quinn would love to bring Chip Kelly with him to be the offensive coordinator. We'll see if that plays out. But Chip Kelly is also somebody who's going to run a lot of plays. You're right. I think it's weird because Dan Quinn, the head coach, has not been particularly successful on the defensive side of the ball. But when he's a defensive coordinator, his defenses are among the best in the league. They're always number 1 in turnovers. And when he's the head coach, the offenses are really good. Now, a lot of that's because he had Kyle Shanahan for several years in Atlanta. They had some pretty good coaches. But I do think that Dan Quinn has a pretty good ability to get a good offensive coordinator. So let's just see. I don't think it's going to be worse than it was last year. Maybe they'll just keep Eric Bieniemy. I wouldn't be surprised if that's the way Washington goes here. They let Eric Bieniemy run the offense. Dan Quinn runs the defense and see if that mixture works. But I think this is a great sign, though, if you believe that Washington is going to draft a quarterback at number 2, because I think Dan Quinn's got to find his next franchise guy. I don't think he's going to wait around and hope it falls into his lap 2 years from now.
No, they have the draft capital to get this set up. And when they do get a quarterback in-house, you're starting out with, a pretty solid wide receiver duo. Obviously, Jahan Dotson, I think expectations are very high for year 2. But based on what we've seen, in terms of total upside, I think Jahan Dotson does offer a lot of upside if he can find consistency with the passer. And again, we'll see kind of how this draft order shakes out. But like at worst, you're getting maybe a Drake May. Like, okay, this could be an interesting move. But I'm kind of fascinated by Dan Quinn. I don't think I realized how top heavy these passing offenses were when he was the head coach, because it doesn't make sense because he is a defensive
I know.
coach.
Wild.
But you would think his mindset would be, no, we're going to run the ball. We're going to jam it down their throats. We're going to we're going to control the clock. No, this was like a high volume offense.
And here's the reason for it. I can just explain really quickly. Dan Quinn's specialty is pass rush. Where he really struggles is stopping the run. So what he wants to do is get into a game where it's a shootout, or not necessarily a shootout, but where you're having to drop back and throw the ball 35, 40 times. What he doesn't want to do is turn these games into a slugfest that's 17-14. He's actually like the opposite of how Mike Tomlin and Mike Vrabel coach. He wants to turn it into a fast-paced game where he can have his small, undersized edge rushers on the field getting after the quarterback. So it does make sense. I do think from a fantasy perspective, it's probably pretty good. From a real-life perspective, meh.
From a real life perspective, it might have been that we had two of the top head coach candidates returning to their jobs as offensive coordinators, which, guys, if you listen to yesterday's show, or Tuesday's show, we covered some of the offensive coordinator changes, so you can go back. You can probably disregard the last segment though, because just as we posted our episode, Marcus, we got the news Ben Johnson would be remaining here in Detroit. So talked a little bit about what to expect with that offense, but all in all, I kind of wonder if Dan Quinn getting this job is kind of a product of the rest of the coaching candidates kind of washed up. And
yeah, exactly. It's a weird time for coaching candidates. Mike Vrabel, Bill Belichick, Ron Rivera. Who else am I missing? Am I missing anybody else big? All without coaching jobs. It's a weird cycle.
Maybe they'll take like a trip to Cancun or something.
I'm just trying to imagine Bill Belichick in Cancun. All right. That is it for today. Yeah, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Dynasty your first listen of the day. Go check out the channel on YouTube. We post videos every single day over there. Kate's been doing a fantastic job with these shorts. Check those out as well. Download the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Follow Kate on Twitter at Kate Bodjuk. I'm at Marcus_Mosher. We will see you right back here tomorrow.